Well, hello everybody. Welcome to everybody who's signed in. We've had lots and lots of interest in this, our sixth, I think, webinar. So thank you for coming along. And as you could see, there's plenty from all over the world. And I know that it's obviously it's 6 o'clock here in the UK. It's 10 a.m. in Los Angeles. So no doubt those that are attending have had their breakfast. And in Australia, it's 5 a.m. So I don't know if anybody's got up early enough to do that. I always feel sorry for the guys in the Far East because in Singapore it's 2 in the morning. So they're really dedicated, those that get up for that. So we had a webinar on foot balance fairly early on in the series. And not only was it extremely well attended, everybody said more on foot balance. So Jim and I spoke, and then when Lorenzo and I spoke, when we were doing the previous, the laminitis webinar, and he told me of some interesting things he's been doing with venograms, and I thought, well, this will fit nicely because we try and have things as up to date as possible, as cutting edge as if you want to say. So I'm hoping this will make a nice webinar. I'm sure it will. You can see from the picture that, the picture on the left is Jim that I took up at Glasgow, where he's still farrier there, and he's put on very many conferences there, and I've been fortunate to speak at a couple, and that was a picture of him just like tonight getting ready for the presentations. The picture on the right, I would hope Lorenzo would remember, but it's actually taken in Moscow of all places at the World Equine Veterinary Association conference, and we were both speakers there quite a few years ago. I haven't got any balder, but that might not be possible. Lorenzo, though, has stayed as young looking as he is there, but with a slight change of his hairdo. So those of you that have been regular attendees know that we sort of have a similar program, and I know a lot of you, probably 75% of the audience, have attended the webinar before. So obviously we opened up early, which sometimes throws new attendees, but it's just like a regular conference. It gives you a chance to come in and sit down and get ready for the start. We're going to have, obviously I'm doing the introduction, and then Jim's going to do his first presentation on medial lateral balance, spiral trimming and shoeing. I will be amazed if he puts exactly the same title at the start of his, but anyway, we'll see. We're going to have a break, and we're going to have the regular scavenger hunt, and the main reason for the scavenger hunt is to get you all out of your seats so that you don't get thrombosis, and I personally know that sitting down for too long a period is no good for the back. So we do that. I hope we've got a good one. I hope we've got one that all of you have a chance of winning. For those of you that haven't done it before, it's the first one to send a picture in to Sophie at the address at the bottom, sjcurtisbooks@gmail.com. And so it's relatively easy for us to get the winner, but we'll see. You've all got a chance with this one, but we'll see how you get on. We've been sponsored by 3D Pads, so we're giving some prizes directly from 3D Pads for that, and that was quite kind of them. And I've got it a little bit wrong there. We've got the casting material, so everybody gets a chance to have some of the material from 3D Pads and casting. And then we've got Lorenzo in the middle of as the sandwich in between Jim's two presentations, and he's looking at the use of venograms to assess balance. We like to have a 10-minute break in the middle, again, whether it's so you can get your breakfast, get your lunch, or get some tea, depending on what part of the world you're in. and we will have our break with the pollen quiz, and the prize is a copy of The Hoof of the Horse, which in the UK is worth £85. I think in America about $110, and probably a similar amount in euros. And so you will get that sent to you. So give the quiz a go. And then we have Jim's final part to his presentation, whether we want to call it the missing lecture, the one that we didn't get in America. And I'm sure Jim's had nearly 2 years to rethink. So I know just like Lorenzo and myself, he's an inveterate fiddler with his presentation. So I'm sure it isn't quite what we were going to get, but I've been looking forward to this for getting on for 2 years now. And we have question and answers. Please put your questions into the question and answers. Don't put it in the chat group. The chat group's great and we can chat amongst ourselves and you can put comments, but questions need to go in the question and answers. We're going to have those answered as much as possible live, but I've also asked the two speakers if they can answer questions online. So clear questions to them, and hopefully everybody will be happy with all that. So I want to thank our partners, and you can see them listed there. We have lots of partners who are able to give people in their organisation or students discounts to this event. And you can see the three from the UK, the three farrier schools: Warwick, Herefordshire, Myerscough. British Farriers and Blacksmiths Association, they negotiated a discount for their members, which is great. The American Farriers Association, the same. International Association of Professional Farriers, the Norwegian Farriers Association, Swedish Farriers Association. I'm not sure if the New Zealand and Australian Farriers Association is separate altogether, but anyway, I don't want to start problems down there in the Southern Hemisphere. The German EDHF is also a partner with us, and their members get a discount to this. The next two, the Humble Hoof is Alicia Harloff, who does a great podcast, and she helps, and she's a partner. And the study of the equine hoof, some of you would know, many of you would know from Facebook, is Lindsay Field, so she partners us. Our newer partner is the Farriers Journal. It used to be called the European Farriers Journal, and we've tied in with them to do quite a few things, including me writing more articles. But we've also done a very, very good deal with them. For any of you wanting to get a free copy of the magazine, either you email them at info@farriersjournal.com and say that Simon Curtis put you through, you'll get your discount. And whether you choose to continue with a subscription or not, that's up to you, but you will get a free copy. So that's a great deal. Or you email us, sjcurtisbooks@gmail.com, and we'll put you through, but you will get a free copy anywhere in the world. And actually, if English isn't your first language, you can look up, it's published in 7 European languages. So a lot of chance there. So we're glad of tying in with them in our sort of project, you might say, long-term project regarding farriery and hoof education. All right, our first speaker, I've already mentioned, is Jim Ferrie. He's a fellow of the Worshipful Company of Farriers. He is no longer, like myself, he's no longer an examiner, but I believe he's still an approved judge for the company and has judged many top class competitions, shoeing and shoemaking competitions. He started shoeing in 1969 and he's still going strong. Jim, for all of us, there comes a time. But anyway, in fact, he told me a couple of months ago he's actually shoeing more horses now than he was in his 20s. So he's a, should we say, I don't know, a miracle of bioengineering himself, that to have shod horses, and lots of horses, for over 50 years is extraordinary. He's in the International Horseshoeing Hall of Fame in Kentucky. As I've already said there, he started in '69. Jim and his brother Alan shoe all types of horses, and I know they sort of slightly lead separate lives, and I don't know whether they meet up about once a week. I remember Jim telling me that they used to try and do that in a yard and shoe alongside each other, but both still farriers in Scotland. Jim, over to you. I think you can start sharing, and I will stop my share. You're away.
How's that? I'm away. Good. Good. Thank you very much for that introduction, Simon. I'd like to give my grateful thanks to these people that have helped me over the last 2 or 3 years, loaning me materials and allowing me to use some of their material in exchange for me allowing them to use mine. It's the exchange of information is invaluable. As Simon said, my farriery journey started in 68, 69, late 68. I was 14, and my brother was 11, and we started with my father shoeing horses, and the Registration Act came in 1977 to Scotland, and my father decided we should be registered. So I'd been shoeing horses for just eight years at that time, and I went to college because I didn't know much about anatomy, and I had 2 weeks at college, and then took what's now my diploma of a watchman company. My brother and I had been competing at the Royal Highland Show and competition, and I just did a Highland Show job and passed my diploma, or RSS as it was then, with honours. And then I wanted to keep going and get as high up the ladder as I could in qualifications. So I took my associate in 1979, and then my fellowship. I was just turned 27 in 1982 when I took my fellowship. But the point of telling you that is, when I took my fellowship, it opened my world to a whole host of people that I wasn't exposed to, and then I started really learning. I had the highest farriery qualification at the time, but then I started learning, and then I started going internationally to shoeing competitions. And the chap on the right here, up here, is David Wilson, and I'm proud to say, he was my mentor when it came to forging. And the two of us, he won the World Championship at Calgary that year, 1985. And again, on the right, this was the only time I was in a Scottish winning team at Stoneleigh, 1995. And great guys, Jim Balfour and my brother Alan, Derek Gardner and myself, and Pat Balfour was the manager, and David Wilson was the president then. And these guys here, everyone's a legend. I'm sure a lot of you recognise them. Craig Trinka, Jim Blurton, Jim Quick, Darren Bazin, Billy Crothers, and a whole host of great guys. But anyway, I still shoe for Glasgow Vet School, have done since 1974, and I do Edinburgh. I'm a consultant, one of the farrier team there at Edinburgh Vet School. And I go to Northumbria Vet School, and I do a lot of work for the local equine vets round about. Just working my own now. My brother and I, we were in business for just under 40 years, and we trained 32 apprentices all over. I'm proud of every one of them. So anyway, today we're going to talk about hoof balance, and we need to try and understand the forces that are involved in the limb and the hoof. And let's look at the forces here. You can read this just as well as me, and there's a driving force. Now, that is basically the horse's body weight. The horse's body weight is a driving force, a vertical force. And the ground reaction force is the force of the ground. And these two cancel each other out in a straight limb. And then we've got acceleration and deceleration. Well, that's obviously the speeding up and slowing down during motion. The compression and tension, well, that's squeezing and pulling as the limb loads and recoils. And friction. And that's basically solid surface sliding against each other. In relation to the hoof, that's the heels and against the shoe, or the hoof, wall, sole, and frog with the ground. And that's obviously how the horse wears its foot in nature, wears the horn, the sole, the wall. And obviously with a shoe, we stop that. But when you get expansion of the heels in normal motion, the heels can wear away against the shoe, and that's the friction. So creep, that's when the driving force and the ground reaction force don't cancel each other out. In other words, the limb is off to one side, then the foot it'll creep, and it'll creep to one side or the other, and that can lead to wall flares. And then we're going to talk about in the second lecture about torque. Simon put the lectures back to front. The dorsopalmar lecture is actually the first one to try and build up the limb to make the second one, the rotation lecture, the spiral lecture, make sense. So torque is the tendency of a force to about an axis, and that's joint rotation. Those are the mechanical forces, most of them, that influence the hoof and the limb. So what are the benefits of maintaining physiological balance? You can read all these: proportional loading, optimal foot function, normal, minimal, protection of the hoof wall. This is, for me, nirvana, because we're farriers or trimmers, and we're constantly fighting the elements, the arena, the field, the environment, the feeding, and all the effects that has on our hoofs on a day-to-day basis. And we're arriving to shoe these horses on a routine cycle, and then we've got to deal with what's happened to them during the last 4, 6, 8 weeks. So yes, this is the benefits of maintaining physiological balance, but in reality, we don't see this very often. We're actually trying to be proactive to try and see this, but we're actually trying to prevent a lot of the elements doing things like wearing the sole away, or the conformation is distorting the foot, or something like that. But anyway, I put this in because it is actually, in my opinion, nirvana. So that's a sturgeon caught in British Columbia. My goal in trimming in four-limb shoeing, it's just dawned on me just now that the last time I gave this lecture, as Simon said, I was actually having a heart attack. So I hope that doesn't happen tonight. But I'm actually 100% fit now, so you'll be pleased to know that. But it wasn't a very good lecture I gave, to be honest. The first lecture, I wasn't very well. But my goal in four-limb trimming and shoeing, I'm going to discuss one-dimensionally. That's looking at the foot on a lateral plane, looking for a straight hoof past an axis, and talking about what can happen to the hoof if we don't get that or don't achieve it. Then we're going to talk in the second lecture on two-dimensional and three-dimensional. And the optimum for me is the three-dimensional, to allow equal load and stress on the distal joints and the ligaments by us creating a flat level footfall with the ground. And that's neutralizing the driving and the ground reaction force. If we can do that and neutralize those forces in the joints, we can actually increase the working life of horses by years, absolutely years. Instead of trying to fix them when they break, we can actually prevent them breaking if we balance them properly. And I truly believe that. So let's look at the anatomy. The most distal joint of the horse's limb is the coffin joint, or the pedal joint. We're going to call it the coffin joint tonight. Now, it's a ganglimus, or a hinge joint, and it's a saddle joint due to the extensive process, the way that this fits here. And it comprises the short pastern bone, or P2, the coffin bone here, and in the background there is the navicular bone. And these here, this is stripped down. This is the ungual or lateral cartilages here. Underneath there are the collateral ligaments that we'll show you in a minute. Now, the coffin joint allows flexion and extension and a moderate degree of rotation on 3 planes, 3 dimensions. And again, I'm really appreciative of Mitch Taylor for these anatomy slides. He's absolutely brilliant in dissecting limbs, and I'm grateful for him. It grosses me out, if I'm totally honest. But all the joints below the knee have a capsular that's here, and a medial and lateral collateral ligament. And these are the foundations of the joints of the long bones below the knee. And inside the capsular ligament is the WD-40, the synovial fluid that lubricates the joint. And it's attached to the coffin bone here and attached to the P2 short pastern here. But that's the foundation. On the solar surface of the coffin bone, we have the semilunar crest here, and the deep flexor glides over the navicular bone and fans out and attaches onto the semilunar crest here. And the distal impar ligament fits in here and attaches the navicular bone to the coffin bone there. Now on the flexor surface here, we can see the navicular bone, the top end, the proximal end of the navicular bone, suspension ligaments of the navicular bone. And I put this little dot here because that is the center, for me, of the coffin joint. That's the center, the three-dimensional center of the coffin joint. And I'm going to show you how I find that in a minute. And this slide here, I think is a fantastic slide. I don't know whether when Mitch did it, I don't know whether he did it intentionally, but it shows me the fragility of the articular cartilage. The horses, like humans, only get one articular cartilage. Now, if we don't, as far as the horse is concerned, keep this distal limb especially in balance, around 360 degrees, then one excessive stress will go in front, back, side, mediolateral, dorsalpalmar of this collateral cartilage, and it'll wear away unnecessarily. And when it wears away, you get bone to bone, and the shock absorption's gone, and the lubrication's gone, and arthritis will develop because it doesn't replace. When it gets damaged, it's osteoclasts and osteoblasts that build up, and up here you get bony deposits, and that's coffin joint arthritis up here. So this shows how fragile this is and how important it is for us to keep it in balance. So let's start doing the one dimension. It sounds a bit like a pop group, but we're going to go one dimension here. That's looking at the foot, dorsal, front, palmar, back. So we want to know what's inside the foot by looking at the outside. Now, some guys do hoof mapping, and they take the foot on the solar surface and draw little lines across it, and that works for them. But for me, I'm a bit more simple, and I can't fathom out all these lines. So for me, I want to know, there's three things I want to know about the inside of the foot. I want to know where the navicular bone is. I want to know where the center of the coffin joint articulation is. And I want to know where the extensor process is, where the extensor tendon comes on it. So there's a way of doing it. So if you go the full length of the coffin joint, of the coronary band, and take exactly the middle, then on that plane, vertical plane there, is the navicular bone. The center of the navicular bone is there in every horse to within a millimeter, front or hind. I guarantee you. If you divide this portion here into three equal parts, 1/3 in front is the center of the coffin joint. I guarantee you. And 2/3 in front is the extensor process in every horse. So what we're going to try and do on the lateral plane is divide this foot. You want the same distance between there and the breakover as you've got between there, the center, and the last bearing point of the heel. And that's what we are trying to achieve on the lateral plane. And that's how we try and achieve it. So if the vet took an x-ray of that foot and you balanced it using this principle, your x-ray is going to be perfect. He's not going to say, oh, or she's not going to say, oh, the toe's too long, the heels are too short, blah, blah, blah. And that's where the coffin bone orientates inside the hoof capsule at between 2 and 5 degrees angle with the ground. The navicular bone is there. Now, the navicular bone might be there or it might be there, but it's on that vertical plane. I'm not saying you can drill a hole straight through it. That's for another lecture, but you can find it. There's a way of finding it using different fancy x-rays and stuff. So here's the internal view describing what I've just shown you. From there to there, exactly in the middle, is the navicular bone, the center of the distal sesamoid or navicular bone. Coffin joint is here, that surrounds the navicular bursa, the coffin joint itself, that's the whole joint there. Center of the coffin joint is 1/3 in front, 2/3 in front is the extensive process. And you can carry these lines down here onto the frog, and you can relate them to the foot. Now, about maybe 8 years ago, I was looking at this slide, manipulating, working out these diagrams, and then I noticed something, and I noticed this here. The flexors and the extensors are actually perpendicular to each other in feet. And that emphasizes to me even further the importance of dorsal-palmar balance. Toes are too long, flexors come under strain here. Heels are too high, extensors come under strain, but nature has put them perpendicular to each other. They're not here and here, they're perpendicular to each other in the hoof. So if you take this as a morbid specimen, and it's a laminitic morbid specimen, which the toe is not normal, but even in the laminitic specimens, the same principle applies for finding the center of the navicular bone, center of the coffin joint, extensive process, and you carry these lines down, and that's how you can relate these lines to the foot. So if you're balancing on the solar plane around the center of the coffin joint, you carry that center of the coffin joint line across the foot there, and then visualize there's a breakover, and try and visualize a circle round here, like that. And if you can visualize a circle around there, now the circle doesn't have to be a full sphere, perfect circle. It can be, if you've got a long foot, it can be an egg shape. But the main thing is you want the same distance from the middle of it to the last bearing point, the heel, and from the middle to the breakover point. The breakover, we talk about breakover. The breakover is the last point to leave the ground during forward motion. So this here is, I've got permission to show you this. This is Henrik Berger's thesis that he did for his fellowship. And his thesis was using different methods to estimate the center of rotation and the center of articulation, the coffin joint, using external reference points on the hoof capsule as landmarks. And I'm quite flattered he actually quoted me for an article I did 2007 and exactly what I've just shown you. And he's saying here that the author, he tends to use the center of the coffin joint as opposed to the center of rotation when he's evaluating this. And he finds by using the center of the coffin joint, he get on an untrimmed foot, he's within 7 millimeters, and a trimmed foot, 3.8 millimeters of locating the center of the articulation in the coffin joint every time. So for me, that's 7 millimeter to 3. So take a mean and average are there. So you're looking at 5 millimeters. If I can balance every one of my horse's front feet to within 5 millimeters in a half-ton animal, that's close enough for me, to be honest. But you can get this and look at this off the Worcester Company Farrier's website. I'm sure these theses are available for you to grab off the website and have a look at. It's well worth a read. So this is what I was explaining to you there. This is the center of rotation here, and this is the center of the coffin joint, according to me, here is right here, the center of the articulation surface. And the yellow is what I balance to, the yellow line. And I find this much more achievable in my everyday work. So if I balance the center of rotation, which is the center by which the coffin joint articulates round P2, the short pastern, that's the center of rotation. If I balance to that, then I've got a lot longer distance between there and the breakover than I have, and have between there and the heel to get balance. So if you can see that distance there, I've got to stick a shoe out with 1/2 inch of flat steel to balance that. Now, where I live, if I give a horse any flat steel out the back of its heels, I'm going back to put that shoe on. So I tend to balance around the center of the articulating surface, center of the coffin joint, and that's how I balance. And I don't have to give so much flat steel out. I just give a slight bit of nice rounded off steel for support, but I'm still balancing my feet. And it's worked for me for all these years, and I ain't changing it. But I totally understand some people that are working with high-end show jumpers, and they're giving them a larger base of support, and they're quite comfortable at sticking flat steel out because they're being ridden in a controlled environment. They don't see fields and hills and mud. Then they do get away with that, and they might be on site to tack a shoe on every 2 or 3 weeks if they want. But anyway, so that's where I'm balancing from, and that's why I'm balancing from it the way I've described it. So, and it's the ground surface I'm balancing to. Some people have said, oh, look at the distance between there and the edge of the shoe there is much greater than there to the end of the shoe. So that's imbalanced. But remember we spoke about ground reaction force. So it's the difference between the center and the breakover point on the ground that's fundamental to me, as opposed to on the foot surface. Now, a lot of farriers and trimmers are obsessed with having nice aesthetics, nice straight lines. The hoof's all nicely straight. They put the shoe on and they rasp nice straight lines down through. But if you do that and you're trying to shorten a toe, then what will happen is you can make this part here too thin. So when you come back to that there, the dorsal wall, you can actually feel a bulge where the tip of the coffin bone is pressing against the wall here because it's weakened. And very often you can actually create laminitis, and you'll see some hemorrhage coming down through the white line if you consistently do this. And that's what's happening here. And I've actually seen lame horses and actually had to build up the dorsal wall with hoof filler to get these horses sound, because too much has been taken off to make them look nice. Whereas I just blunt them, and at the distal end, I just blunt this toe. You sometimes get a wee smiley face there, but I just blunt that. And then by doing that, you change the force on the coronary artery that grows the foot around the coronary band. It changes the forces in the coronary band, but changing the ground reaction force in relation to the driving force here, then what you're doing is you'll grow a new hoof. You'll see a bulge here at your first shoeing if you don't thin it and you just put balance through the center of the coffin joint here. You'll change the angle over time, and you'll create better balance over the long term without doing this straight line. So conformation that can predispose to dorsal palmar imbalance is this is a picture here, because I couldn't find a horse that looked like that. I've been trying for years to take a picture of a horse that I think is normal and get it to stand normal, and I actually never succeeded. So that's perfect. You know, slope of the shoulder, hoof pastern axis correspond to each other, a straight line down through the elbow, just touches the ground just behind the point of the heel. This is what I see a lot that can create dorsal palmar imbalance. This is a horse, I call it back at the knee. You can see if you take this straight line, it's the knee, the carpus is behind vertical. And very often these horses can have a dorsal palmar imbalance because it's almost impossible to create a normal hoof pastern axis in this type of foot. And Mikey Van Heel did a great, in 2010, did a great paper on handedness, left or right handedness, and the protracted limb and the retracted limb, and what happens when you have this. And very often you'll see it I'm sure the thoroughbred people see it. Long legs, short neck can lead to an upright foot and a flat foot if they're grazing in short grass and that sort of stuff. So, and usually the upright foot is the retracted foot. The small foot is the one that stands behind the other one, and the foot that goes out in front is the protracted foot, is the larger foot. And very often this type of foot can have a negative angle to the coffin bone inside there. So what we try to do is we try to balance these limbs. It's not the feet that I'm actually really interested in. If you look at the styloid process here, we want to have these parallel. And if you can imagine, you've got an upright foot here. If you drop these heels, you would imbalance these limbs. If you raised that foot, you would imbalance the limbs. So that's horse is naturally, that's its natural limb length. And it's quite happy to function like that. And this is quite a high-end eventer. And that's the norm. But sometimes the opposite, the small foot needs some help. So in this case, I put a 2-degree wedge pad on here and balanced up the processes here. So you can see the upright foot here and the flat foot's there. So there's no big rules, but so look at each, start looking at your styloid processes, and if you come across this, make sure that you can balance them. And you will find that the horses will start, if you work to this, you're working to them, you're balancing the limbs instead of the foot, you'll find that your riders come back to you in 6 weeks and say, you know, it's much more freely on the left, right, rein, whatever. And it is amazing how you can actually change the way these horses go. So the collateral ligament here, it can also be stressed in dorsal palmar balance if you've got a long toe, low heel, whatever. Just watch this portion here and look at how much stress that this would be under if the foot wasn't in balance. You can see how much movement that this ligament has in the dorsal palmar phase of the stride. So that's a go fishing there. That was a salmon that leapt there. I missed it. So I spoke about my style of shoe. Well, my style of shoe is we tend to in South Scotland we tend to use a lot of concave shoes. Concave gives us optimum grip. The mud doesn't stay in. You can see that I very seldom touch the soles. Very seldom. You can see that I let them flake out naturally. In the winter, starting now, we've got these soles will wash out, and we'll come back to just no sole. I very seldom touch the frog. You can see I hardly cut it. But I use the same principles as we've discussed: a straight line through the center of the coffin joint. And this is about as much heel expansion as I give my horses. I like them to grow into their shoes, but virtually no flat steel. We've all got our areas. You just shoe to adapt. I'm trying to show you how to find the center of the coffin joint, and you can adopt your own style. If you choose to use this, adopt your own style to suit. So here's the concave shoe from the side. If I took a straight line down through here, I would hit the bone somewhere about here. So you can see I just blunt the toe, break over is there, and just a nice hint of silver steel just for the shoe to grow into. If the horse overreaches and hits there, it's going to glance off instead of catching it and pulling it off. And that's how I shoe. This is one of the hospitals that came in. It's obviously a bad, a long toe, weak-heeled. So I put this called a natural balance shoe, put that on there. I think I just wanted to get that toe back. But I don't like to do square toes and front feet. The coffin bone is not square, so I don't think the toe, I don't mind doing them on hind feet. I think I can affect a lot the way a horse moves behind, but incorporating a square toe into my work. But in front shoes, I just did this for the picture. So, but you can see I've used the same principles to balance. But I like to create, especially on the older horses with coffin joint arthritis, a nice round break over. This horse can break over anywhere, and these shoes can be good. Generic, they're called a roller shoe, and these can really help balance on the dorsopalmar plane, and minimal ground resistance as the horse moves forward. I'll use a lot of these Equilibrium or Carecat, the comfort shoes, using the same principles. Maintain the toe strength, allows easy forward motion. I use a lot of these, and I know there's a whole load of host of shoes that work for facilitating movement around the coffin joint, but I tend to use my hammer and my grinder and these, and there's not much I can't do with without a hammer. With a hammer, I can change most things, and I like these shoes because you can see here the breakover there. Now this is thin, so those of you, if there were a few horse owners on here, or mainly farriers or whatever, if you put excuse me, a concave shoe on here, full thickness, now a horse will be shod 6 or 8 times a year, and if it's a 10 millimeter shoe that goes on there, it'll be worn down in the lateral toe quarter to about 2 millimeters. So it's wearing 8 millimeters 10 times, eight times a year. That's 6.4 centimeters of steel that horse is wearing off its toes. Can you imagine the impact on the coffin joint as that steel is impacted on the ground? So I tend to I love these shoes because that is all gone before we start, but it doesn't affect the life of the shoe or how it works. And I think, you know, the design of these shoes, this style of shoe is fantastic for helping dorsopalmar balance, especially in horses that have got issues. So sometimes if horses would discuss arthritis, you can see arthritis here, it's going little osteoclast bone are built up here. And this horse is in pain, not just in the coffin joint, but up the pastern here. The periosteum's damaged, the bone skin is damaged, and there's a build up here. The suspensory's coming round there, blending with the extensor process to attach here. And this bony lump's building up underneath it. So sometimes I'll use these two. When they first came in, they were called Tennessee navicular shoes. That's how I learned them. Tennessee navicular shoe was the first one. But I started using them for not navicular, but for coffin joint arthritis. And they're really good. This is an aluminium. But you can make I find a lot of heavy cobs get coffin joint arthritis. So this is 2 shoes laid on top of each other, and the nail holes correspond. So I just welded one on top of the other on the back third, and then take a quick cut and cut them across the widest part, the centre of the coffin joint, and you can still use the heel nail because it goes through both shoes. And the horse just has to nod its head. Now, what is interesting, if the horse has got coffin, you can just see the bulging hair here. If a horse has got coffin joint arthritis, you can groove, weaken the wall with edgier rasp. You can see I started it here 5-6 months ago, and at every subsequent shoeing, just put a groove. And you'll know if you're right, if the hoof wall bulges out, then where you weakened it was a perfect thing to do, because you've allowed the bone to build up underneath the hoof wall and with minimum restriction. So it can really help. And these horses, obviously you can't reverse the arthritis. You're just trying to keep them happy for, you know, another few years if you can. That was a nice fish. So another problem we get is 0 or negative palmar angle into the coffin joint. So this is here that the coffin bone should lie between 2 and 5 degrees inside the capsule. This is lying negative, and the pain is here. So what happens when the hoof moves, you can see here, the load comes on the hoof, it moves dorsodistally to the front and down. The heels expand, and you can see the movement and the movement is vertical at what happens is the movement is virtually vertical under the extensive process, slightly vertical here, slightly forward, and then forward and downward at the heels. And that's normal, and that allows the heels to open and close. The hemodynamics, the blood supply inside, as the weight comes off, it fills up. As the weight goes on, it empties. And this is nice normal hoof function that happens. But if you've got a negative angle to the coffin bone, you can see that here to here is coming down, and the wings of the coffin bone are jamming against the solar corium here, and that could be very painful. So here's what happened. Here's what can happen in extreme cases. If you look at this little shadow here, the wing, or the very tip of the palmar process is broken off. You can see it's separate here. So negative angle, positive angle. So what I've done here, I've trimmed that hoof from negative to positive. It can be done. You can trim it out. You don't have to, because if you raise the heels, what you're doing is, yes, you're changing the angle of the bones, but unless you're not actually changing the angle of the bone inside the hoof capsule by raising the heels. So what you have to do is, if you're going to do that and unload these heels by raising the heels, you have to do it by using the frog as your friend. And I'll show you different ways of doing that. And sometimes, I spoke earlier on about excessive dorsal wall thinning. You can see here the distance between there and there is much thinner than there at the top. Well, what's happened here is the guy that did this has actually created a negative angle to this hoof. He's weakened that there. He's weakened that junction there, and this has allowed the foot to drop backwards. So by excessively thinning the dorsal wall, you actually can create this negative angle. Now, this in Scotland, this is never really a problem to us in Scotland, because most of the time the ground can accommodate the footfall. But in the drier countries, and this year it's been a real problem because we had 10 weeks of drought, and by the end of the 5th week at the vet hospitals, we're starting to see horses coming in, and they're blocking. When they put an air block in the palmar digital and they block out the back third of the foot, these horses are going sound. So then they X-ray, they obviously X-ray the navicular bone to think, oh, well, it must be the navicular. But the navicular bone seemed fine. So, but then they do a lateral and they see the negative angle. So then I have to address the negative angle, or we have to address the negative angle, and the horses go sound within a short space of time. So I'm going to show you different ways of addressing the negative angle, and hopefully you can incorporate one or more of them into your everyday work. So as I said earlier, it can be achieved by just the trim. This is the same foot, negative angle. Now I trimmed it, and what I did was I just cut the toe, never cut anything from there backwards, just cut the toe. And it seems so simple, but you'd be amazed how many people can't leave the heels alone. So I call this, for one, I call it a parrot's beak. The toe resembles a beak of a parrot or a budgie or a bird of some description. Call it a parrot's beak. It's also called a retracted sole. So this is what I do. It's just, there it's there. And you can see that this is coming up to meet you. The heels are a reasonable height, actually. So I just cut it from there. It's not even the midline, there forward, and don't touch anything here. So what happens here is, there's the video that I've just shown you earlier. What you want to do is, you see the movement, and this is going dorsodistally, but then if you pack the foot and pack the back third of the foot here, watch what happens. Watch what happens to the movement of the hoof inside the foot as you restrict the vertical movement by packing the frog and the back third. So what happens is, there's the foot normal, You've got vertical, vertical, forward, slightly vertical, forward. Here, when you pack the foot, everything is just going forward. There's virtually no vertical movement. So you're minimizing the expansion and contraction of the foot by packing the back third. And that by minimizing the expansion and contraction, you're stopping the friction of the heels with the shoe there. So you're actually growing heel. And by growing heel, you're changing the angle of the coffin bone inside the foot. So, but sometimes the trim is just not enough. This is a nice salmon pool here. There's a long-term treatment. So that's what I've spoken about, the long-term treatment, negative angle here. You can use a graduated shoe using the same principles as I discussed. Here, center of the coffin joint, there, balance that. Now I just blunt that toe. And this is the third shoeing. Look how I've changed it. Look, there's where I was saying earlier about changing the coronary, the pressure on the coronary band. That is a different angle to that, maybe 2 degrees. So this is the new hoof. It's going to grow down at that angle there. And so consequently, the bone inside is going to change by 2 degrees. And that's a long-term approach. This horse didn't really go sound until, and this horse hasn't got flat feet. So, but it had a negative angle. So, but it didn't go sound for about maybe 2 shoeings before I changed the angle enough for it to go sound. Now there's other different ways of packing the back third. And you can see here, this is what I mean, the wings of the coffin bone come down and cause a subsolar hemorrhage here, usually on the medial side, because more of the weight is borne down the medial side. This is a generic word, a spider plate filled with hoof mesh and dental impression material. This is sole guard, just fill the whole sole up with sole guard. But what I do is I put, this is a Play-Doh, just putty, plastic putty, something that doesn't go hard, and put that right under the wings of the pedal bone before I fill it up, so that and clear the sole so that the wings can come down and go back up without any interference whatsoever. So then when you fill it here, you're minimizing expansion, contraction, and it can really help. Before I put pads on of any description nowadays, this is fairly new, and thank you to Simon Moore for the tip on this. This is he uses a carpet glue. This is a clear varnish. Spray clear varnish on there and just sprinkle some copper sulfate on there, and you can actually totally prevent thrush before you put the pad on. Some people fill it up with magic cushion and other stuff. Hoof matrix as well is something I use, and that can be good too. But this really prevents thrush. And another way you can change the angle is if you take one of these spider plates and weld it into the shoe here, but on top of the heels here. Now this foot, that's a 6 3/4. This is a big foot, and there's nearly 60 pounds worth of dental impression material in there. It was a big foot to do, but this horse went from lame to sound immediately, but doing this. And the model with the 3D pad, this has been a bit of a game changer since these came on. We're using them to externally change hoof angles. I took this picture off Facebook. I was so impressed with the cleanliness and of it. So apologies that I can't credit whoever I took it off, but if he's on here, absolute great work. This is more like my work. It's a bit messy, but the principle's the same, and I'll show you what happens here. So here's the 3D pad applied. This is a foot. This is only you can't see the date. This was 2 weeks ago, maybe no, 3 weeks ago. So I took this. So this horse was lame, negative angle. Put the 3D pad and an equilibrium on. Changed, there's the center of the coffin joint, did the balance, but look how it's changed the orientation inside the hoof capsule. We've got a nice straight hoof past an axis. But look how the bulbs of the heels and where the ungual collateral cartilage have totally changed orientation inside the foot. The navicular bone has changed. It's moved up inside the hoof. The joint space is now open as opposed to being really tight at the extensive process. So if you're seeing this type of foot and you apply this type of package, you could actually possibly prevent coffin joint arthritis from happening. You can see it's just going to happen there. Whereas if you can keep a nice open joint space there, but look at the sole. I've not touched this. Look at the sole here. It's the same thickness from there to there as it is from there to there after I did it. And you can see the dental impression material in the back third there. So this has changed the angle of the bone inside the hoof capsule, but not, you know, as soon as this package comes off, the bone is back to negative again. So hopefully by using the frog and using the dental impression as an auxiliary digital cushion, it'll help. An onion shoe, for those of you that like to forge, an onion shoe is very good. This, you can just slide some putty on plasticine or Play-Doh under here, and this you can grow heels using this shoe. Jean-Marie Denois has come up with an aluminium version of this, selling them worldwide. Great shoes. This is pretty heavy, but it was a good forging exercise. It's just to show you my brother can catch salmon too. Now, other problems we can get in the back third of the foot are navicular problems. You get various navicular scenarios. You can see some you can fix and some you can't fix. So here's a navicular bone cyst here. The horse with a navicular bone cyst has got a 0 angle. So I tried these pads on it. Now this is in 2000. This horse was 2007, I think. No, 2010, this horse. These were on it in 2007, and it's got that hole in the cyst, and it's got reasonable heel on this foot. You can see the heel there, and I just filled it with copper sulfate coated eco packing material, and applying all the same principles. But this horse just never came down, because every time I came back to it, here's 2010, it's walking out to me, and it was absolutely almost fracture lame, and they were going to put it to sleep in the afternoon if we couldn't help it. So we spoke earlier on, negative angle, parrot's beak, but every time I shod this horse, I came back to it, the parrot's beak was there. It was there every time, didn't matter what shoe I put on. I had bar shoes, I had the pads on, I had everything. So I thought, there must be, so the only way I can help this is to get rid of this parrot's beak. So this was 2010. You can see that it managed to live. So in 2014, you can see I've gone from there with the parrot's beak and the negative angles to positive angle, no parrot's beak. And I did it by using this, put the shoe on back to front. So as it was walking, it was wearing the toe off, and it stopped growing the parrot's beak. And that horse is now, I shot it last Tuesday, I shot it. So from 2010 to getting put to sleep, it's a teaching horse, and I shot it last Tuesday. And it's actually, I've gone out of these, I've actually gone into the 3D pads, and it really quite likes them. Another type of shoe is a graduated shoe. This is a Jim Blurton graduated shoe. I'd like this in aluminium. And when I do use them, I use them as a rehab shoe. This horse has got reasonable heels, and I'm just trying to unload the navicular area here. I use it as a rehab shoe, but I put like sole guard or something like that underneath to help bring the frog into play there. Am I okay for time, Simon? I can't hear you, but I'm assuming I can. Sometimes we get prominent frogs. You can see here this frog's
got 5. Yeah.
Sorry?
You've certainly got 5 minutes.
5 minutes, cool, right, that's okay. I'll be about 10, that's good. So sometimes with a prominent frog, you'll see this slide used for something else later, but the frog, I've done this deliberately to show that what a prominent frog is, but normally I'd trim this frog. But when you've got a prominent frog, you'll maybe do heel reconstruction. So I'll show you how to do a heel reconstruction pretty slickly. So you can see the state of this foot here. It's sheared heels, it's frogs in a mess. It's just a mess. And it's actually, surprisingly enough, not that lame. So what I did was I made a shoe, a nice symmetrical shoe, good length, applying the same principles, break over. It's maybe a touch long on the toe, but so then what I do is I put some oil on the shoe. This is hoof oil, goes on the shoe, and I put the shoe on with 2 toenails there. And then I prise the shoe off the foot until I achieve the medial lateral balance that I want to achieve. And then this is stuff called adhere. You can use whatever you want. And fill this up. And because I've put oil in the shoe, the adhere doesn't stick to the shoe. So the foot can expand and contract like a normal foot. So then you rasp it, make it look reasonable. I'm sure I should have smoothed that off. Maybe I did smooth it off. But you can see a line, fine line here. And then 6 weeks later, we've got this. And look what's happened. Look at this heel sheared up there like that. And then in 6 weeks, because of the way that I've got the medial lateral balance achieved, I've got a nice balanced bulbs of the heels. And then 3 years later, I thought, oh, well, this is done well. So this is the same foot 3 years later. You can see I've got heels. And sadly, the horse passed away 6 weeks ago. But that was, that slide was taken about 8 years ago. So anyway, that can work. So you can rebuild heels using acrylic. I'm sure you know that anyway. Another way of doing it is if you use a bar shoe, you don't have to be so critical with your time. You can slide a half wedge in there and just jack the heels up to the height you want. But interesting, look here, see how that's a normal heel bulb. Watch what happens when you create balance. You change the orientation of the ungual collateral cartilage and in the back third and the digital cushion. This is off Miami Beach. I caught a shark. Another thing that we can get is DDFT adhesions. It used to be the only way we saw these was when the horse was dead. But here's what it looks like inside. This is the benefits of modern science. You can see the tendon's been stuck to here, and these are the tendon fibers inside the navicular bursa here. This is the fibers floating about, and these, if they're given, so if we jacked up the heels, these would just stick back onto the navicular bone, and the horse would be sound for a while, and then as soon as they broke, they'd be lame again. So what will happen is the vet, this is Patrick Pollock, he's done some great work. He goes in the navicular bursa and cleans off these adhesions and leaves the tendon as clean as it can to get it to minimize the adhesions. And then we come away with some way of unloading the foot. Another thing you can do is, this is a navicular bone fracture. You can see this is inside the navicular bursa again. You can see the navicular bone opening and closing here. So it's not, there's pioneering work done by Chris Collins back in the 80s on navicular fractures, and he put a screw in them. And this was done 2 months ago in Glasgow by Christian Byrne and the team at the Wiper Centre. And the planning that went into this operation was phenomenal, actually, to locate the centre of the navicular bone and get a screw in there. And that's the fracture before, and that's it after. And then I put, we wanted to unload it, so I put a double wedge pad on, and it reduced it, took the pad off at 4 weeks. I'm nearly there, Simon. And another way of unloading it is to put a graduated shoe on, and then full sole pack. And then this is the shoe here. You put the graduated shoe on, and you can see how you change the orientation. And as I said earlier, what happens, you can open up these joints there, and that totally unloads the deep flexor and navicular region there. Another way is this is a navicular burst of penetration. So we needed a hospital plate. The joint was flushed out. So I put this is super fast, glued onto the hospital plate, and the hospital plate goes on. And that's 1.5 inches elevation. And the hospital plate can come off and change the dressing. We used to, for deep flexor tendons, I've combined this to my lounge table. There's a patent bar shoe. They have their uses, but I don't tend to use them these days. But remember, in the search for balance, dorsopalmar balance, and look, everything's changing. And what worked before, you can be reluctant to take it off, but reevaluate at every shoeing, and especially with graduated shoes. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim, for, as always, a brilliant presentation. There's quite a few questions come in, so if you could, have a look at some you'll be able to answer written, and some we'll save for the Q&A at the end.
So where did I go? Q&A or what?
Yeah, just go Q&A and you'll see them there. If there's anything you want to answer written, then do so. Otherwise, we're going to take as many at the end. But I've noticed they are starting to build up, which is great news. So anyway, once more, thank you for that. And we will just now, the scavenger hunt, we are going to have a break, and so you can have a coffee, whatever time of day it is. Don't have one if it's 10 o'clock at night for some of you. You've got 10 minutes break, go away, do what you want. But if you want to win the prize, and the prize is 2 sets of hoof casts and 4 pairs of 3D pads. And I know Derek Poupard will even ask what sort of size you want. So I want you to send a picture, and the first one in is the winner. And it is a cap with a horse on it. So most people have caps. So anybody that's got a horse of any sort with a cap on it, the first one in wins. Okay, enjoy the next 10 minutes, and then we'll be on with Lorenzo and looking at venograms for our next presentation. Thank you. And just so that everybody knows, we've had a big number of pictures. Just shows you how many people have got caps with pictures of horses on, or horses. I was a bit worried that we'd only get a few answers. I think we've had more than 40 emails. So good number. Okay, are you ready to go, Lorenzo?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Simon. I saw the picture of us in Moscow. But anyway, I'm getting more and more gray. You always look the same. And anyway, let's start this speech. I will have 20 minutes. So I will try to be really short. I am a professor also in the University of Pisa, in human physical therapy. In the University of Bologna, I am professor on laminitis and all other foot disease, foot pathologies. And anyway, when we look at today theme is the foot balance. Okay, so let's see about this. And thinking about balance, many people know about the Tower of Pisa. There is a Leaning Tower also in Bologna, but it is much less well known all over the world. Anyway, it's a really nice tower. We claimed it with Pollitt when he came to Bologna. You never came to Bologna. We always met everywhere in the world, Simon, but you never came to Bologna so far. Maybe in the next future you will come and we will go up to the tower. Anyway, The tower, the Tower of Pisa is leaning, and there is a problem with this tower. But the problem is because of the water at the down under the ground. The water under the ground is leaking, and so the tower first of all sink, then it can lean left or right, and then you can also measure it with the plumb line. But anyway, there is a lack of water under the tower, and this is the key problem to solve. When we look at the foot, there is a lot of blood. The P3 is literally swimming in the blood, and is suspended by the blood in the frontal and sagittal plane. And but the problem is what? That is not easy to see because of the hair and of the horn. And the horn is really thick. In human is completely different because there is no hair, and even the nail is transparent, so you can still see the coral. Or you get a Superman eyes, but you need to see beyond the not seen, because you need to see not only the X-ray, but you need to see the venogram. That is the only instrument to see the coral. What's the history? There have been many studies about the blood flow, even arteriogram included. But anyway, the first one has been done in '92 by Chris Pollitt, that did the venogram in ex vivo, showing the retrograde flux in the arteries. Then 1 year after, my mentor, Dr. Rick Redden, already set the standard of the method, using it on a standing horse alive. Then in 2007, Amy Rucker set the standard of the normal aspect of venogram. And in 15, I set up the laminitis timetable and differentiated choremosis and choromitis. Anyway, the normal elements are the radiopack. That the abnormal elements are the temporary. 1 second, I just want to move this. Okay, are the secondary, the abnormal element is the absence of contrast liquid that can be temporary, just associated to biomechanic static vent compression, or definite, that is associated with to inflammatory necrosis or anoxia, more or less advanced. Anyway, we are not here to talk about the pathology because we already discussed that in the last webinar on laminitis. Anyway, this technique, as Jim said me a few days ago in our practice, it has been invented for pathology. And the 4 X-rays in the 40 seconds were the first method, the first described technique. But then I added 2 in 2010, and this year I added even 2 more. Why? Because the first were to see, the first 4 were like this. I added 2 more and 2 more this year. Why? Because the first 4 were to see corium changes in pathology. These 2 were to see how the corium changes when it's unloaded. And this last is to see the corium changes when the corium is overloaded. Of course, it's not for pathology because you cannot overload and unload the corium so easily when you are dealing with the pathology. You can do this when the horse is getting a little more sound and when the horse is getting ready to completely full athletic activity. So if you look at the corium directly in ex vivo, you can see the corium in pathology, but you can see also in poor performance horses that are close to a lameness or when it's close to die. but now I'm getting more and more horses to be referred to me to see them and improve their performance, even if the quorum is really good, because in my eyes, no food, no horse is a really old adage, but a better quorum can improve the horse. That is a double positive phrase instead of a double negative one. I'm quite a bit positive. But anyway, the structures that you can see with venogram are this. So, of course, as my friend Mike shows in his really wonderful picture that has done the world, that are all over the world, that everybody knows. So a thickness of sole can protect the corium and can protect the bone. A thin sole can induce hematomas from the concussion that can be seen even on an alive horse with venogram. Okay. Lately, also this study has been really interesting to show how the corium can be affected, even with picture, that when you can see all this ring that are sign of suffering of the foot. And here you can see that this horse that was doing pretty good for many years, trotting, galloping, or doing whatever work he was doing, just to put the frog in contact with the ground, he shows sign of sufferance of the foot. Okay, so with venogram, you can see that the corium is closely, literally touching the ground, so it's not protected. And when it's not protected, the ring are closer, and the hoof grow is slow. Anyway, recently I see that people forget about universal principle as a shoe horses to protect the foot, but take into account that when you see only drawing, maybe you are in a wrong or erroneous theory. So the earth is a geosphere, and we have seen this with picture from the moon. And please vaccinate yourself, because you can save human lives. Okay, so many times all these people are the same. The people that don't chew horses like to think that the earth is still flat, and they don't vaccinate us anyway. But sometimes not. I'm not. I don't know. Anyway, I think this is kind of weird. It's a loss of common good sense. Anyway, where does the pain come from? The pain comes from the corium, that is the richest structure inside the foot of a nociceptor and proprioceptor. Proprioceptors only at the front. Anyway, this experiment that we did in the University of Padua in 2009 shows you that all the horses that had the periosteum integrum did show no pain. The horses that had the thinner sole and showed that the periosteum was not integrum showed that they can had pain because of sometimes because of the osteolysis of the bone. Okay, and you can see pouches of serum that doesn't come from what I thought 10 years ago, from the production of the horn, but the serum comes literally from the osteolysis. Okay, here you have the front of osteoclasts. Anyway, a pouch of serum inside the hoof can be painful as a stone inside the shoe. Anyway, what we can see from Mike's drawing is that if you have a thin sole, you can have a bone remodeling, and if you have a anteroversion or a positive palmar angle, you have compression of the apex of P3 and bone remodeling of the apex of P3, as in a contracted foot or club foot in the English way. On the contrary, vice versa, in a retroversion, so in a negative palmar angle or plantar angle, you have compression of the bulbar vessel and osteolysis of the palmar or plantar processes. As you can see in a clubfoot, you can have a big hematoma there. I will ask Mike to send me also a negative palmar angle picture. If we see this in the dorsal plane, you can see that you can distinguish what is normal and what is literally dead. Okay, just to give you an idea of black and white. And between these two, there are all the grays that of all the situation of foot pathologies. Anyway, when we deal with horses, we need to deal primarily on the corium just to survive the horse, because these horses have a really hard life, and as Jim said, for him, physiological food balance is a nirvana, because he's dealing with a really hard weather condition in Scotland. But anyway, when we deal with domestic and athletic horses, they live protected, they die old, and sometimes to protect a little bit better the corium can make the difference from a horse that can win, or the horse in a racetrack, or the horse that can jump even 10 centimeters higher, making the difference between 1.5 meters and 1.6 meters. That's a big difference economically, and that's why they are ready to pay the fee now. Anyway, when we are dealing with horses in sport, is one thing, but performance and box for many people are completely different situation to look at the foot balance. That's not my experience. When when you can make the legs straight and deal with the unbalanced hoof and make it straight in 1 or 2 years, the horse will perform better, and the horse will rest better, because also the rest is part of training. Anyway, in my experience, when on 100 cases I am called for navicular syndrome, only 10 are really effectively inflammation of the navicular bones. Many of them are pain of the foot. Okay. And if you can increase the quality of the corium, the solar aspect, and watch all the papilla, you can make your horse happy, and you can make your horse more performant. That's not easy to measure in horses, but it has been really easy to measure on cows. That with some thickness, with the thickness of the digital calcium, they can increase the liter of milk. Anyway, that is the only venogram I have done on a cow. I have not done it. I have Professor Zani of the University of Milan has done it and gave that to me. Anyway, in inductive science, following experience takes long and need a lot of statistics to see how to deal with hoof balance in arteroversion, lateroversion, medioversion, and retroversion. But I deal much more with deductive science. So doing venograms, doing thousands of venograms, I've seen that if you have a lack of the solar plexus of the sole, you can have a vertical dislocation of P3 that will be measured with CA distance on a normal X-ray without contrast. But this can lead to the tower, that is the bony column, to go forward and have a rotation, because at that point the wall will go up, and compress the coronary plexus, the venous one, or go back and compress the bulbar version with the retroversion. That will compress as anyway the coronary plexus. That's what I have done in my experiments that maybe a lot of people know in 2007 and 2009 that led me to describe the 5 Earth theory. where you can have a compression, not compressed, not compressed and not compressed. But anyway, 2 years ago, I did the same experiment in the transversal axis, in the dorsal axis, dorsopalmar axis. And as you can see, you can have compression, not compressed, not compressed, compression, not compressed, not compressed. So this in 5-10 minutes. So think about the changes that you can have in a couple of days, in a couple of weeks, in a couple of months. This can lead to even to distortion of the hoof growth rings, and change the shape of the coronary band with cracks and also with ingrowing hoof. And in practice, what does it change in our activity? In our activity, it changes that following the corium, you can trim and put the shoe in a better way. That is not this way, because this is not respective, is following the distortion of the white line, but in the corium way, you need to put the shoe like this, and it is not possible without X-rays. Not possible. Nobody can. Okay. And this, in deductive science, that's what I discovered, that the muscle is the pump. So we are dealing with the muscle, and if we can relax the muscle, maybe we can avoid to cut the tendon. Okay. But still, we need some month to have a better perfusion and reverse all the vicious circles of the vascular bed of the foot. Okay. The vicious circle is the same as in human. Everybody knows the tennis elbow. The pain is here, but you have a contraction of the extensor muscle. The same thing you can have in the horse. You can have pain because of a vascular problem in the foot that will induce contraction of the muscle of the shoulder and of the antebrachium. And this is a vicious circle, because this will decrease the circle of the lymphatic venous blood that will stagnate inside the foot. And this is a vicious circle, because this will be more painful and more contracted and more blood stasis in the foot and so on. And this, you need to cut this vicious circle and go back to a virtuous circle. How can we do? If you have a lock there, you can have a vertical dislocation of P3 that will lead to go left, forward, go left and right. You don't believe me? Look at this. This is before and after pumping. But I put the foot a little centimeter outside of the block. Can you see the decompression? Same foot, 5 seconds after. Okay. So this is our images, not drawing. So even in the lateral medial imbalance, in the dorsopalmar aspect, you can manipulate the axis and the bony column. And of course, this will have an influence on the vascular bed. And you can get out of these pathologies. Of course, you cannot do this in a month. It can take 6 months to get a restoration of the vascular bed, of the veins and of the arteries of this foot, to go back to a performance and maybe avoid a major injury, a major problem as the ingrowing foot. Okay, that can be also in the dorsal, not only in the dorsopalmar, but also in the lateral medial sense. And this way, you don't need to cut the tendon on this, because I've seen crazy things lately. But yeah, to cut tendon also for an ingrown hoof, so that made me crazy. Anyway, I shut myself, and let's go on. So in this way, you just need to cut a little bit the nail, put a shoe in a corium way, and the horse is back to activity. Okay, You can find this in on the European Farriers Journal. It's very detailed. It is a nice article. So what we do if the owner is ready to go, we arrive, check, we can make my podiatry view X-rays and do the X-rays before and after. But I don't use the plumb line. Okay, sometimes I use this. I find this much more useful. Many times we use this and we draw with the pen the millimeter to trim here and there and there. So we are on the same page. That's the communication between farriers and vets. You will see in my new perspective for podiatry view that is will be with Fuji. And this is how to do the X-ray before. You always need 6 X-rays before. Sometimes we need some X-ray meanwhile. I like this plumb line on the corner band that gives you an idea of where the corium is, that has been described by a Canadian farrier. Sometimes you need to scratch your head and find solution just to make the hoof balance better in the sagittal and in the lateral medial, in the transversal plane, okay? And you need the check X-ray, because if you don't have the check X-ray, you don't know how the horse is improving in the months. Because if you only do X-ray on a performance horses, in 6 months you have a following of the X-rays through the months of this horse, and this has the main value of a venogram. Of course, with if you look at your foot, you are looking at what happened to the corium 4 months ago. If you have an X-ray, you know what is happening now. But if you do a venogram, you will know what will happen to your foot and to your corium and to your hoof growth in the next 4 months. Okay, so as lately in the equi meeting, I have seen that this line that I invented in 2010 was shown by a farrier. I asked him, hey, where have you seen this line? Oh, is it diffused and so on? So this is my line and is under a gentleman agreement with Fuji over since 10 years now. So this obliged me to talk to you about this line. This line for the lateral medial balance goes across the 4 nutritive foramen. I take, so it gives you a really nice idea of the osteolysis of the medial palmar processes. And this gives you a really precise millimeter to trim in the outside quarter. Okay, so when you check, you can see, you cannot give the bone back immediately, not even in 1 year, 1 or 2 years. But anyway, you can check your hoof balance really nicely. And of course, this X-ray need to be done only by educated on the corium vets that have the extensor process exactly in the sagittal line. If the extensor process is not in the sagittal line, is not valued, is not a good X-ray for podiatry view. And you can see here how we can make a horse really hoof balanced in just one trimming, and of course, radio guided showing, positioning showing. Thank you. I was pretty good in time. Only 5, maybe 5.
Perfect timing, Lorenzo. You're a trooper. You're a trooper. Perfect timing. Well, thank you for that. I hope that elicits questions. We've got questions coming in, but don't let that stop anybody. So thanks, Lorenzo. Hang around.
Yeah.
And as always, I always get, well, lots of things wrong. What I'm going to do is get back to my screen because I very rudely forgot to introduce you, didn't I? That was very rude of me.
Oh, don't worry. Everybody knows me, and everybody has seen our picture.
And especially, I was pleased that you mentioned Dr. Rick Redden, and I knew that you were a student of his, and as with all good students, and your PhD was on venograms, and you have moved the science on, as everybody can see, and you are continuing to move it on. So thank you. So your three questions are, and this is for a copy of Hoof of the Horse. Would you describe medial lateral balance as what you see from the front of the horse or what you see from the side? That's question one. Where is Lorenzo a professor in sport and anatomy? And he did actually say, and I said it in that slide, his introduction, which is why I got rid of it quite quickly. So where is Lorenzo a professor in sport and anatomy? And he is a professor at 3 universities. Question 3 is back to balance in a way. If we assess a horse moving, what type of balance do we call it? So those are your 3 questions. We're going to have a 10-minute break now because this is the final break. What I would like to remind all of you is that your discount for your next webinar, if you've attended this, is Balance 2, and your discount for any of my books is Balance 2. So the same discount code, and that will get you any of those. So let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll get back to the last bit. And there is a poll running, so if any of you want to spend the time doing the polls, we take it very seriously. What you suggest to us, really seriously. We've made lots of changes to this webinar based on your answers in this poll. So thank you very much. See you back in just under 10 minutes now. Bye. Okay, so the poll had a great response. I think 64% of the audience responded, which is really good. Thank you for that. Before we move on, I want to say about the scavenger winner. I was really worried that it was asking too much for people to find caps with a picture of a horse on. All I can say is it was some of the most hilarious answers that have come in, and Sophie and I were in stitches, and the chap that put a post-it note on his cap with a hand-drawn horse's head, and somebody held the skull of a horse on top of their cap. So 10 out of 10 for effort. Sorry, you didn't win. Now the winner was, and he gave a model answer, was Dean Dibstill. And I'm not quite sure where Dean is in the world, but you will get the 3D pads and the casting. That will be sent out to you, and it'll be organised by Sophie by email. So really well done. I don't know about these questions coming in yet, but we'll let you know that towards the end. So as we've already discovered, the way I've got the agenda is not the same way around as Jim. Jim, are you with us? There you go, Jim. So I'll stop my share, and if you go into share, then we look forward to your second lecture.
Right, so the second part is, thank you very much, Simon. The second part is looking at the hoof and limb in 3 dimensions, part 2, obviously. Thank you very much, Lorenzo. That was very enlightening. It's amazing. We live countries apart, and I like to think we're singing the same hymn sheet from different perspectives. We'll soon see by the end of my lecture, see what you think. In the UK, and doesn't matter what country you're in, we need to have a standard for teaching hoof balance. The apprentices, whether you're a trimmer or a farrier, you need to have guidelines for trimming a hoof. And the basic guidelines for trimming a hoof is to put your hand in the inside of the carpus, the inside of the cannon bone, and hold the leg underneath the point of the radius and look down and create medial-lateral balance according to a T-square. And that's what we have to do. We have to teach that balance. And then once we've taught that balance, then hopefully it can be deviated from to go towards dynamic balance. And this lecture, the second part of the lecture, is going to talk about where the T-square theory or T-square application is effective and where it's not. So the aims for a diploma or an associate exam or farrier contest, look, we want the coronary band parallel, we want the horn tubules straight, we want the heels trimmed to a straight hoof pastern axis, the distal bones plumb a line through the center of the carpus, bisects the cannon bone, pastern bones in the hoof. Trimming in the solar plane, we want uniform wall thickness, we want the sulci of the frog trimmed up. All this is there, and the solar plane of the foot's flat and the bulbs are equal, and the coronary band corresponds to the distal border of the foot. Now again, I could put a big nirvana down here, because how many of us actually see this and achieve it in feet in everyday life? I don't, and many, I must admit. So here's a question. Describe using diagrams the ideal balance in the forelimb. Now, again, how many forelimbs do you think you see that look like this picture? How many hoofs do you see with equal feet? We all know that more load comes down the medial aspect of the foot, so the medial side is more upright than the lateral side. We make front shoes. Yes, we'd love to make them symmetrical, but in reality, the front shoes are slightly straighter in the medial side, the inside. So, but this is the answer to a DIP WCF exam question, and this is what is expected from diploma students. And once they've achieved the diploma, then they're out in the big bad world shoeing horses. So we use a T-square to assess the hoof balance. Now this is a long axis. The long axis is a straight line down through the cannon bone, pastern bones, and a line at 90 degrees perpendicular to this by 6 foot. And the pastern axis, this is the short axis from the fetlock down. So if you've got a fold that's got a deviation below the fetlock, you trim at 90 degrees to the pastern axis, because the epiphyseal cartilages, or the bone, the ends of the bones where the bone grows from, they close at just over 3 months below the fetlock. Although not radiographically, they don't close radiographically, they still close it. They'll grow more dense and wider, but they won't really lengthen much more after 3 months. But as I said at the bottom here, this balances two-dimensionally. When angular limb problems needed, then I would trim to the long axis. And this is virtually the only time I would trim to the long axis. And I know it's quite a bold statement, so I'm hoping I can back it up with what I'm saying. So you can see here the growth plates there. You can see the distal end of the cannon bone. You can see the distal end of the proximal end of P2. And you can see here a deviation where the carpus deviates inwards and the radius deviates outwards. That's called carpal valgus, or if both legs are affected, knock knees. So what we do here is we create an equilateral triangle with the site of deviation. The center of the center of the carpus, we create an equilateral triangle with the ground. So that involves lowering the outside, moving that foot across and putting a medial extension on there to create this equilateral triangle. And that's how we neutralize the growth plates, the forces. We spoke in the last lecture about driving force, ground reaction force. We want to neutralize these forces, and we do it by creating an equilateral triangle. Now, this is not a lecture on fixing folds. So this is the talk is on when I would use the T-square to address it. And this is one, the opposite of a valgus is a varus. And the varus means deviating outwards from a fixed point. Valgus means deviating inwards towards a fixed point. You can see this leg here has got a slightly rotated cannon bone pointing out here, and then a valgus, the bowed fetlock, and all the pressure is going down the lateral aspect of the limb. So in this case, we need a lateral extension and create an equilateral triangle with site of deviation, which in this case is a fetlock. And then this is a Suffolk punch foal. And what I've done, this is a racing plate, and I've just punched 2 coarse nails here because this foal foot can take nails. It's only 2.5 months old. And I've just punched 2 coarse nails and created lateral extension that way, and then filled it up with glue where it's sticking out. So for mature horses with an angular limb problem, this is another fetlock varus. I've created equilateral triangle with the center of the ground, and this is done with a 3/4 full of shoe, and you can see that the shoe's sticking out there with you could call it a lateral extension, but I'd call it a symmetrical shoe on an asymmetrical limb. But more importantly, that's thinking in 2 dimensions, that these problems here, the valgus and the varus, that's 2-dimensional because you're looking at a static limb with an angular limb deviation inwards and outwards. Trim it to the long axis and you will fix it, or you'll help it. But I think more importantly, we need to think in 3 dimensions as the load comes. It doesn't just come inwards or outwards or back or front, it comes down, and it creates 360 degrees load through the bony column. Now, I've been doing this trimming and shoeing protocol for over 25 years. A lot of people think I'm an absolute crackpot doing it, but I've managed to maintain my work at 2 vet schools and various vet, and I would say as many as, I'll be bold here and say as many of 80% of the work I do at these schools is trimming to land flat, creating neutralizing forces coming down the limb, and with great success. And that's all I do. And I'm showing you, I've been showing people how to do it, and a lot of people think it's crazy, but I'll show you, and hopefully you'll get it. So my goal is to, as I've said, is to neutralize the forces in the joint spaces from birth. And when trimming and shoeing, you can see how important it is to maintain this. You can see a nice straight bony column here, nice open joint spaces, nice even bones, nice straight hoof pastern axis, nice balance through the center of the coffin joint. That's my goal when I'm trimming and shoeing. But I've found over looking at horses closely, as we all do, that I would say virtually every horse's front limbs I've looked at has got a rotation somewhere. Now, this one here, I was asked to fit, this is a 13-2 show pony, and I was asked to, she just bought it, but it turns out, its toe turns out, she said, and she would like me to straighten its feet to get them to move it, turn in. I says, how do you plan that I should do that? She said, well, if you leave the inside high as it hits the ground, surely the limb will turn in. I said, yeah, that'll happen, but I says, you'll also stress all the inside of the joints. And anyway, I said, what you've got here, I says, you've got an outward rotated limb from the shoulder. I says, if you look at the leg is absolutely perfectly straight, but it's rotated outwards from the shoulder. Yeah. I says, so if I do anything to the foot to turn that limb in, I says, it'll be lame. So anyway, rotations can be from the shoulder, from the carpus, or from the fetlock. And I started to look at horses, and so when horses are rotated outwards, they don't correspond to the T-square. If you trim them to the T-square, the outwardly rotated ones will be high, what we call high or long outside, and will land outside and then secondary load inside. And it doesn't create a problem until maturity, until the horses are 8 or 9, because the joints going up and down the leg here can absorb, they're elastic enough to absorb the shock until they become 8 to 10 years old. And then they're not elastic enough to do that. So we spoke about collateral ligaments earlier on, and every joint, every long bone's got collateral ligaments and capsular ligaments. So the stress on an outwardly rotated horse comes down the medial aspect and causes a repetitive strain injury for all intents and purposes. So a deformable surface can allow wriggle room for imbalance. You can see this horse galloping on a deformable surface. The horse hits the ground and the ground responds to the foot, and an imbalance in a foot that on that surface really has no effect at all, because the ground is absorbing the concussion. But this is what I'm talking about when a horse has got unlevel footfall. Now, this is a horse with a lovely straight leg and trimmed to the long axis. So what happens here is the horse lands lateral toe, and then as the weight comes over it, it secondary loads medial heel, and all the load and the forces, the driving force comes down and stretches the ligaments on the carpus and medial side, fetlock in the medial side, which we know the suspensory ligaments attached to, collateral ligaments attached here. So you can strain the medial branch of the suspensory, you can strain the medial collateral ligament. And if this horse is of an age 8 to 12 years old, we can end up with problems. Now, the load, the concussion, the other problem you get is concussion forces go up the leg on this side, and the load forces go down the leg from this side. So you get a double whammy on either side because of foot imbalance. So the point is we should try and watch each horse just walk and hit the ground, land. So what happens to the coffin bone inside the foot? If you've got excessive tension on the lateral side, then there's more bone laid down on the coffin bone. If you've got the compression, then you get bone resorption, usually on the medial side. So it's really interesting here. You can see that a dorsopalmar X-ray. Now, I've never actually met Lorenzo, never spoken to him, but for 20 plus years, I've been using these foramini as a guide for, and it's really interesting that he's doing that too. But if you look at an X-ray here, you can see it's dorsopalmarly imbalanced, longer at this side here, shorter at this side here. And interestingly enough, it's been trimmed to the long axis all its life. And look at the length of the P1, the long pass there on that side compared to this side. So this is the side that's landing first, and then it's secondary loading here. So to the horse's auto-correction system to get its joint capsules is to move its foot outside its midline, because it's shod to a T-square. So this is the medial side here. So it moves the foot outside the medial side. So it lands flat, and then we end up with the bony column looking like this. So interestingly enough, the foramini there should be parallel, as Lorenzo said. It's really great to hear him say that. And sometimes the vets can take what you call a malposition. The horse just moves its foot. So don't always go with the joint spaces here and here. If the foramini are tipped medially up, then that's a good indication of a medial lateral imbalance, in my opinion. So what that can lead to, if it lands lateral toe and secondary loads medial side, we can get a medial collateral ligament dysmitis there. Now, the dysmitis means inflammation of a ligament. So the inflammation can come here, or it can come here. Now, this attachment on the distal end of the ligament is slightly less strong than at the proximal end. So it tends to be deep inside the hoof capsule that the collateral ligament dysmitis occurs. And this can be a very painful thing. And it's only recently, we used to, when I started doing this, we used to surmise, oh, it's probably a medial collateral ligament dysmitis. But So we'll get the footfall right, and then we'll see. And then they would come right, but we never really knew what was happening. But then MRI for horses has become the vogue, and we're seeing exactly what's going on inside the foot with MRI. So you can see the signal here is darker on the lateral side and lighter on the medial side. And that shows for sure inflammation of the medial collateral ligament. You can see the same here. The stir is darker there, lighter there. But this is unusual. This is a medial oblique X-ray, and you can actually see the bony lump there where the collateral ligament's been torn from its insertion point on the coffin bone there. And that's actually the first. I'm really grateful to Sarah Taylor for allowing me to use this slide, but I've never seen, until I saw this slide, I've never seen an X-ray showing a medial collateral ligament dysmitis. And it happens here, right there. So again, since MRI came, you get a bucket list of problems inside the foot, and it's trying to work out which are the primary problems. That is the collateral ligament, the main cause of lameness, but we have to address it anyway. So there's different ways of addressing it, and this is Jean-Marie Demois' idea, or no idea, he's a brilliant man, and his was to thin the lateral branch, thicken the medial branch, and stop the medial branch sinking into the surface, and this leveled up the coffin bone inside the capsule. This is Mitch Taylor's shoe. He forged that, and it's a beautiful shoe. My elbow wouldn't take that anymore, so I'm using his picture. This is more like my effort. It's an oblique shoe, and I like this because I filled it with dental impression, and it's not, this is heavy unless it's made of aluminum, whereas this is just one bar that goes over the frog and then fill this, and this has the same effect as this. So what happens inside here, you can see, look at the foramen tipped up on the lateral side here. The bony column is imbalanced, and there with the shoe, as the horse lands, the lateral side displaces. It causes a balance on the bony column, but an imbalance to the base of the foot dynamically. And this rehabs, in my opinion, this rehabs collateral ligament dysmitis in a surface when the horse is walking. So, and I quite like this way, but it's not the way I do it. But I know it does work, and there's better people than me can do it. What I do is I do a dynamic or a spiral trim and shoe, and this is where I go a bit crazy or weird, because usually I get what I can with the trim, not excessively reducing foot depth, and what I can't get with the trim, I get with the mechanics of the shoe. So what I mean here, we've got an outward rotation here. So this is the lateral side, this is the medial side, and you can see the foot is on a spiral. So the medial heel and the lateral toe are on a diagonal. There's the T-square, so you can see how much heel is left up here compared to heel, here. So here is the lateral side. If it's an inward rotation, that means the bone's turning in. Then the lateral side is the high side, and it tapers to low medially. And this is how I address medial or lateral collateral ligament dysmitis, by dynamic trimming and shoeing. So this is what the trim foot looks like. You can see it's high medially, trimming to low laterally. This is a slide I used in the first lecture, only I haven't trimmed the frog. This frog would get trimmed after that. But interesting, look at I've shod this horse for 12 years. Bulbs, the heel bulbs are parallel. And that shows me I've neutralized the forces on the foot when I've got the heel bulbs. These are very quickly deformable soft tissue structures in the foot. If this foot wasn't loading properly, then these would be shunted up like sheared heels. One of the questions in the previous ones was, how do I deal with sheared heels? And this is how I deal with sheared heels, by creating dynamic level footfall. So just to show you, this is a yearling right front here, this one. Now observe its footfall. Every stride is going outside its midline to lie flat. It's been trimmed to the long axis. Every single stride is going outside midline. You can see it landing lateral flat, float, lateral toe first, secondary load in medial heel, every stride. So here I've trimmed it on a spiral, lowered the lateral side. Now watch, every second stride it goes out. That's the way I used to go. And then it goes, oh, I don't have to do that anymore. And it goes, oh, I don't have to do that anymore. And then it goes, this is the way I used to go. So what that is muscle memory. It is about 3 days for the muscles higher up to see, to realize what we've done. So the next day there'll be 2 strides straight and only 1 going out. And then on the 3rd day, everything will be right underneath the center of the shoulder. So here we're back at the x-rays again. You can see it's definitely, this foot's definitely off the center, compressed medial joint, really wide lateral joint, really high lateral here, really low here. So this is again imbalanced if the ground surface is different medial laminate. Foramen never lie. So you can see that the ground surface is imbalanced here. This height is greater than this height, and the same on the other side. So before we had lovely T-square but imbalanced foot. After we'd spiraled, we've got the shoe on a spiral. We've got the shoe in a spiral, but the bony column is parallel. And this is what I'm trying to achieve by this type of shoeing. So I'm going to show you now some of my techniques for achieving dynamic balance. Again, we're talking about spiral. This is it here. You can see the heel bulbs are parallel. The trim is not trimmed to the long axis. The shoe is not on the long axis. As the horse hits the ground, it lands nice and level instead of lateral toe and secondary load in medial heel. Looking from the ground surface, I've taken the ground surface of the toe right round to the heel, taken that off rounding it nicely. And the nail, this is crucial, when you nail this up, rasp the heads off the nails on the lateral side, or the side that is going to contact the ground first. And you'll start to see these shoes will start wearing evenly, because before, when this horse was walking, this side of the shoe never touched the ground. You're pulling the shoe off and it's only worn on this one side. So that you can imagine the concussion that's going up that side of the limb. That's just showing the dorsopalmar balance with the same shoe. So look, we're going to show you some videos of varying degrees of what I'm discussing. So here, this is 2/10 lame on the left front, and it's trimmed to the long axis. And to a lot of us, this is a normal horse. This is only shod 3 weeks. It's at the vet clinic. It's lame on a circle, on a hard, and it's just slightly lame. But if you watch the footfall, especially this one here, lateral toe, and you can see the secondary load medial heel. Now, to a lot of us, that doesn't look bad. That's normal. It's just putting it's nearly flat. So what I did with this was just trimmed it in a slight spiral, never overdid anything, just put the shoe in the spiral. And you can see, look at the left front now. What this horse is doing now, it's actually virtually almost brushing, and we'll discuss that later, but it's moving its foot closer to its radius. So it's loaded its limb much more evenly. So we're neutralizing the forces on the ground reaction force with the driving force. So all I did was 2/10 lame, trimmed it and short it, and that horse was sound within it was 3 days. That horse was sound, just having done that. So routinely, this is how I routinely shoe. So this horse here, this is 17 years old. I've shod it for 12 years. He's got an outward rotation here. You can see the cannon bone is pointing over at 2 o'clock here. He's got decent feet. His show jumps. He's got slight hock issues just now, but his show jumps at a reasonable level. And so I've been using, I just take a normal shoe, take the outside ground surface off it. But the crucial thing I do here is I fit the shoe. This shoe is not level. This shoe is on a spiral, so it's I tip the shoe down towards the heel, especially at the lateral toe here. So you can see that that's up off the anvil there and flat on the anvil here. So it's not a level shoe. There's no point of spiral trimming and then taking a lovely level shoe and burning it on, because you're undoing your trim. You have to make the shoe slightly on a spiral as well. And there's a bit of skill involved and a bit of time, but I can honestly say that virtually, look, there's guys that have worked with me and they know how I shoe. And the end result is this is Zach, just finished. Now that is on a slope. You can see the cars down here. And so this is on a camber high here. So this horse will be perfectly flat on a flat surface. So sometimes if we don't get this early enough, many of the rotated limbs, they develop a side bone. Most horses develop a side bone. Some will develop a side bone earlier than is normal. This is one that was in at a vet school, in for its second shoeing 3 weeks ago, and came in for loss of performance, never blocked anywhere below the knee, and at the first shoeing I couldn't trim it to land flat, so I spiral trimmed it. And you can see that I trimmed it as much as I dared. I didn't want to do too much. I said, could you go and do a dorsal palmar x-ray on this? And they did a dorsal palmar x-ray and it's still slightly off according to the foramen. But I thought, there's no way I'm doing this spiraling it anymore. So it's got side bone. So here's the end result. And it's a Connemara pony. It's outwardly rotated from both shoulders, and if you watch it, I was really impressed because this was nearly an inch out of balance when we started to the first shoeing. And as usual, I don't know what most of you are like, but I forget to, I'm in too big a hurry to fix them that I forget to take the video before. I usually take the video after and then go, I wish I'd done it. But look at the footfall and you can see how nice and level it's landing there. But you can see the side bones there. Is it a fracture side bone or is it a different center of ossification? That's the question. But what I do with these is, we spoke about it earlier on, is I groove them. So what I do is you can feel a bulge where the side bones are and just put 2 or 3 horizontal grooves and weaken the foot. And there's a lot of pain involved as these side bones the ungual cartilages are turning to bone. So if you can weaken the foot, a bit like the coffin joint arthritis of earlier on, if you can weaken the foot there and put these grooves in, and you can see that this is a same type of shoe, grooves here. So if you can do that, then you can really help these horses. But sometimes the medial wall is non-existent because of been landing lateral toe, loading there, bursting up the whole inside wall. So what I do here is, again, it's the same, shoes on a spiral, put a bit of oil on the shoe there, nail the shoe on and build up the medial wall, and the glue doesn't stick to the shoe, so the heel can expand and contract naturally. And you end up with this. I haven't quite rasped the heads of the nails off this one yet, but that's how to do a medial spiral with using glue. That's one method of doing it anyway. For those of us that like to forge, you can do a medial or a lateral wedge bar shoe. This is, you just flick that round there and weld it in the corner. You can see it's welded along the length there, and take the lateral ground surface off here, and you've got a nice hand forged medial wedge bar shoe. Another method, this is a graduated shoe. You can take a graduated shoe and just take one side off, and you end up with a nice dynamic level footfall using a graduated shoe. Another way is that we can incorporate the pads. You can use various ones. This is a 3D pad. You can see this foot is trimmed on a real good spiral. I've been shoeing, you'll see it in a minute. I've been shoeing this horse for, I think, 14, 15 years. It's 17 years old now, and it's been shod like this since, maybe not as long as that, maybe 12 years. It was lame, came lame to us as a 5-year-old, and my brother showed it the first time, and then it moved to nearer where I went, and I've been shoeing it since the first shoeing, and he got it sound initially, and now I've kept it that way, and it's still sound to this day. These slides, this was taken just over a month ago. You can see the pad is on a spiral, the shoe and the pad is on a spiral, and this is how I did it. Take the shoe and fit it and put it on the spiral, and then I just use the grind. You can use your hammer. I just use the grinder to soften the lateral ground surface. And then once we've done that, you can then take the pad and do similar. So you've got a 3-degree pad there. So you just take one side off and then marry the pad to the shoe like that. And it takes virtually no time. So then, as we showed earlier, we do the copper sulfate and the dental impression material. And here is this is the horse. This is the horse landing. You can see this is at 17. I've been showing it for all these years, and I can't get it to land flat because of the rotation. Put the shoe and the pad combination on, and it went to some veteran class just after I showed this and placed quite highly. I think it won, actually. So that's another method of doing it. And I don't think I'm not altering, I'm not jacking up one side. I'm dynamically shoeing the horses and creating level footfall. Another way of doing it is this is a steel medial wedge. So you can take that like that and then turn it into a spiral shoe on the hammer, no problem. So here's another one. This horse was lame with navicular disease, allegedly. It had changes in its navicular bone, but you can see here exactly what I'm talking about. And having looked at this, hopefully people across the world will start looking at their horses differently before they shoe them, and they'll see this lateral toe, secondary load medial heel. Now, this was lame, really lame on the left front before I started, 2018. And it got the previous medial wedge that I just showed you with the graduated shoe with one side chamfered off. So what we do is we trim the foot and then see how much of a medial wedge it takes to balance the bony column properly. So you can see it's still landing lateral toe and secondary loading medial heel like that. So we then put the shoes on, And I look at it, and it's no exact science. I just look at it and say, oh, it needs that much, and I do it. So the shoes go on, and you can see it immediately that it's landing flatter. So this horse, it was within 4 weeks, this horse went from being 4 out of 5 lame to sound. And that's 2018, we're at 2021, and I showed it 3 weeks ago. And I'll show you, so there, that's it in 2018. Quite a fair degree of wedge. It's the wedge that I showed you on the anvil two slides ago. And so I shot it 3 weeks ago. And this is it weeks ago. And the girl's doing dressage at whatever level she wants to do it at, but she's doing dressage in this horse. And this is the shoe that's on it 3 weeks ago. But you can see I was talking about my style. Look at the depth of mud that horse is in every day. Got to keep these shoes on. In fact, I lost this one. This one came off. I had to go and put it on last Saturday. And this, see what it's in. And you can also see by my work that I don't polish things up just for show, for taking pictures. This is my everyday shoeing. And this is the situation that I have to deal with. But you can see the spiral we're at now, and that's 3 years later. So the opposite of the outward rotation is an inward rotation. So you take the knee and hang it, you can see the cannon bone turning in on a spiral. You can see it turned, the whole leg is turned in from there. So that requires a lateral spiral. So the lateral side is that. Now these are much, much rarer. I would say as many as 98% get the opposite. They get the medial heel left high. So it is important to watch every horse's foot hit the ground before you shoe it, because if you don't, one of these will come and bite you, because it'll need a lateral spiral and you'll have given it a medial one. So what happens here is you can see where the T-square would be. And here, this horse was lame, came in, nothing else, blocked to nothing. I put a lateral spiral on it, that was the shoe, and got it to land flat. And the horse back in for one more shoeing, and then I liaised with the farrier, and hopefully, I've not seen it again, so hopefully carrying it on. And that's what I tend to do. I can't fix them in 3 shoeings, then don't think the farrier is a fix. Usually I like 3 shoeings and then liaise with the farriers and back. So you can see that's lateral spiral, big horse, 16-2, 17 hand, something like that. So going back to that, is it high outside or low? You've heard us talking about high outside, long outside, or low inside. Another reason that you would have to do this dynamic shoeing is horses with chronic laminitis. The horses with chronic laminitis, the coffin bone doesn't just rotate. We look at these x-rays and you see a coffin bone that, oh, it's rotated. They rotate vertically, but they also rotate medially inside the hoof. They don't just go. So the lateral side gets way more blood than the medial side. So the medial side, as they land and they load, the medial arteries are compressed. So chronic laminitics grow more foot on the lateral side. So you have to create level footfall. And if you start shoeing chronic laminitics like this, then what will happen is you neutralize the forces on the coronary band, just like you do with the other ones, and you'll start to grow a foot that's not, crumbling away on the medial side. And I've proven this on literally hundreds of horses. So what I did with this, the way to do this was, instead of, I wanted a heart bar and I wanted it light, I wanted an ally. So I glued some adhere on the foot surface of this, so that built the spiral on the foot surface and then created it that way. And in fact, it's not hard, but I put an open-heeled shoe in this one because it was a chronic laminitic. But that's another reason you would have to dynamically balance. You get wrong applications in this. Now here's one. This looks like, oh, it's a spiral, but it's not. That medial heel and lateral toe are on the same plane. So all that's happened here is the medial heel's been lowered, or the lateral heel's been lowered. So that's wrong. And here, both heels have been lowered, and then there's nails like football studs or soccer studs sticking up, and that's bad. That'll make the horse more lame. Sometimes, as I said earlier on, outward rotation can cause brushing in front limbs. You're actually moving the feet closer together. So on the unaffected foot, you might want to put an anti-brushing shoe on. Takes no time. Just chamfer that edge and crack 2 nails in. No problem. But there's always a contra. So beware of lameness present as an imbalance. If you've been shoeing a horse and you've been dynamically balancing it, and all of a sudden it's lame and it's not landing flat by like half an inch, it's be a corn or an abscess in the medial heel or a tread or an overreach. So look at that instead of going, oh, we'll spiral it, because if you spiral that and it's an acute lameness, you will make it worse. So keep that in mind as well. And the take-home messages: watch every horse take a step or two before you trim and shoe it. And if you trim and shoe to land flat and balance around the center of the coffin joint, you will, and I mean that, minimize concussive-related lamenesses, and you will put years of life on your horse's working life for sure. And just because it always has been doesn't mean it always has to be. And you can message me here and I'll talk you through the process if anybody's interested in it. But sometimes even we can't fix them. But I really wanted a quote once, and that is it. So thank you very much for having me, Simon, and I'm glad I was able to present it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, for an excellent presentation. I certainly had a vague idea of spiral trimming and shoeing. Now I have a far more precise, and so thank you for that. Very detailed on that. That's what we really wanted. That was the main point of today. So we finished on that, but we haven't finished the webinar. But thanks once again, because we've got a number of things that I need to do. There, we got the questions. So our quiz winner is Melanie from Switzerland, and she very quickly got the questions right. And it is there are those questions, and the clincher was that whereas Lorenzo is a professor at three universities, is at Pisa, that is sport and anatomy. So well done to all of you. Lots of correct answers, but the first one in was Melanie from Switzerland, so she'll be getting a copy of the Hoof of the Horse. Just to remind you again that Balance 2 is your discount code for the next webinar, and also any books. And we have some future plans. We're going to let you enjoy Christmas. We're going to do our question and answers first, but our next webinar will not be until January 2022, and we've got Professor Michael Weishaupt and Hayden Price lined up to speak to you. So here's the thing. One thing we've discovered about Facebook, where we get most of our PR, is that of course Facebook has turned into this giant, as we know, control freak, and we realize that not everybody gets our messages through Facebook. So what we would really ask you to do is, any of you out there that have enjoyed this webinar, please tell other people, because we don't trust Facebook to tell everybody. In fact, they tell probably about 10% of our Facebook friends. So please do that. It's up to people if they want to come or not. They can email at sjcurtisbooks@gmail.com. They can say they want to be on the mail list at any time. Of course, they can take themselves off. So let's do the Q&A, and we've got some nice questions, but I'm going to ask the first one. Now, those of you, and I know there was many at the last one, Lorenzo was a bit overworked. He got 95% of the questions. Well, I have to say, Jim is the one that might be overworked here. So, but he kindly answered. In fact, he was so efficiently answering the questions, I was a bit worried that he was going to get through the lot. But I had a lovely question from, and I hope again that I pronounce this correctly, Lisa Lott Eriksson from southern Sweden, and she explained that she's not long out of Farrier School there, and she asked something slightly off, shall we say, the spiral shoeing, but I think all three of us will have an opinion on. And what she basically says, what is it about natural balance shoeing that can be so controversial? What are the pros and cons? So, Jim, do you want to fire at this one first of all?
Well, natural balance shoeing, natural, in my understanding was it came from a study done in feral horses in the 80s by somebody Jackson or something. But anyway, it showed this Mustang roll, and the horse was rolling its toe. So you had to do this Mustang roll. But these horses, it was done in the spring, and these horses had come through a winter of looking, foraging for grass. So they were going to be digging for the snow. So I don't know if it was a true reflection, this Mustang roll in natural balance. So it came that you had to do the short toe. So that led to a square toe and a really blunt foot. And then it led to the shoe being set right under the foot and nails fish hooked out. And there was extremes like everything. But I think there's a compromise, a modern day compromise to natural balance. I think the ground surface of the wall should be angled at, I usually angle them at 45 degrees all the way around. But I don't put a square toe on my front feet when I'm trimming for grass. But I do square the toe more on the hind than the barefoot trimming people that are taught. I don't believe you should leave a pointy toe on a hind foot. So I blunt my hind toes more than most people. But I think natural balance, it got a bad press, but I think it's evolved since the 80s, and it's not really as bad as it used to be.
Lorenzo, because I know as a student and colleague of Rick Redden, Rick, although it was not his initial idea, his conference did an awful lot to promote this, didn't he? And so I don't know what your opinion is on natural balance shoeing and trimming.
Look, if you're talking about the natural balance shoe, the squared toe with a mild rocker, that was always a bidimensional trimming. Okay, so it was easing a rocker. I agree with Jim with this natural. As I said, all the real scientific studies of the Australian team showed that nature is really aggressive, so they need to survive. And the mean age is 5 years old, so there is no ideal in this nature. Okay, of course, if in the nature of the Mustang there are no competitors, okay, they can live longer and even proliferate like rabbits. Okay, but it's not an ideal thing. With Rick Redden, I saw when I started to work with him, I immediately saw that he was already much behind that point, because it was not just a rocker. It was not just an easy breakover. It was a three-dimensional shoeing, three-dimensional trimming. so to have effects also in studying, even on horses that were not moving, even inside a box rest. That's a different thing. Okay. Did I answer your question?
You did. Both of you answered the question, and we're going to move on quickly. I'm in the same place, that if it's a laminitic or a horse with a flexural tendon problem, I'm straight on with those sort of shoes, or I was. Anyway, let's just see that Ben Hansen says, "Evening, Jim. I have a horse that lands lateral toe and loads medial. On MRI is showing damage to the lateral collateral ligament. Have you seen damage to a collateral ligament due to compression rather than sprain on the medial side? So can it get damaged by being compressed rather than tension?"
Probably that didn't cause the damage, to be honest. I've seen them with lateral collateral ligament damage landing exactly like he said, but it was possibly stood on something medially and stretched the lateral collateral, and that would cause it. So in that case, I would still trim to land flat and neutralize the pressure on both collateral ligaments. If look at the bony column in the X-ray and see if the bony column's balanced, then it's balanced, and keep it balanced. But if the bony column will be balanced, if the collateral's normal, that probably doesn't make sense.
Okay, but I think the point you made there, which we all ought to accept, is when we're looking at balance, that sometimes the most perfectly conformed horse can make a wrong step and can injure itself, and sometimes so that's a good point for us to remember.
Absolutely.
Okay, Adam Child said, you shoe around the point of rotation, and I think this again aimed at you, Jim, and not the center of the coffin joint. Where would you consider this to be? Would you say roughly 3/4 of a centimeter back from the apex of the frog, just in front of the center of the coffin joint?
No. I don't think I've obviously not explained it right. I shoe through the center of the coffin joint, which is the articulation center.
Okay.
And I tried to explain how to find that. So that's what I shoe to. I don't shoe to the center of rotation, which would be slightly further back than where I actually shoe to. I can put the slide up again and show you. But
I love the thing. It must drive people, and especially scientists like Lorenzo, but it's typical of British and Americans to mix a fraction, 3/4 of a centimeter, rather than saying 7.5 mil. But anyway, I'm sure you understood what he meant. Let's move on, because quite a lot of questions came in, quite a lot of thank yous actually, which is nice that they put them in the question part. Christy says, in regards to sighting a foot for balance, when using the radius for the center position, how would this affect the results of sighting if there was an imbalanced function in the upper limb? And she says muscle tightness, strain, etc. So in other words, using the cannon, but of course there's a problem higher up. I don't know if either of you have an opinion on this. I think it says here it would be ideal practice for farrier owners to resource an osteopath. So I don't know whether Christie's an osteopath, but anyway, how do you feel about that, Jim? About the whole limb or below the tarsus?
I've got no experience of evaluating above the cannon bone, so no.
Okay, well I can say that let me just say this, I tried it once and it went horrendously wrong, which is why I went back to balancing from below the carpus and tarsus. But fire away, Lorenzo.
Look, in the experience we have done with the pod block, in the transversal axis. In order to increase the medially and laterally. We have done also the experience to put dots on the articulation and ligaments all in the upper leg. And what we have seen is that manipulating the axis can displace the shoulder, and this is a horse reaction, so it's a muscular response. The tricky thing is that just a change of 3 millimeters at the sole make a change of a displacement of the 10 centimeter at the shoulder. So with some Ferrie, we are now trying to see on high performance horses just to manipulate only few millimeters at the sole in this lateral medial imbalance, just to train the muscle in order to act differently, okay? But still, it's a new era, it's a new thing, it's a new perspective. But for sure, we can manipulate much more than what we think and than what we expect with the shoe in the upper leg.
Okay, thank you for that. Scott Lampard says, Jim, with regards to fetlock valgus deviation, do you manage that any different from, well, from true joint angulation deviation? I'd say if it's fetlock valgus, it is true joint angulation deviation, but in brackets, straight line deviation versus torsion versus rotational deviation. So I think that's the question. Do you manage it differently if it's a rotational deviation or if it's clearly an angular limb?
If it's a clear angular limb, I think I said that I would trim to the long axis. If it's a torsional deviation, I would trim to line flat.
Okay. Well, that's really good and clear. And of course, it's always, I've often said about the outward rotation that if you just do them across a two-dimensional plane, you could nearly trim them at the coronary band and you still wouldn't get them right. So, so I think that's a nice, whether people agree or disagree, but it's a nice differentiation to say that it's those rotational ones that are really going to benefit from the spiral trim and shoe. Let's see. Marley says that, can you talk about the forging technique to achieve the spiral shoe? I've got a feeling this came in just before you actually showed that, but if you can just say it again, obviously without the pictures.
Well, the forging technique is basically fit the shoe as you would normally fit the shoe with whatever length and heel expansion you give, and then go back to the anvil just before you cool the shoe. Put if it's a toe clip you're using, put the toe clip against the anvil and just knock the shoe downwards towards the foot surface on the lateral side if it's an outward rotation. And that you've watched the horse walk, so you see how much it's off after you've trimmed it. So in the ideal world, if I've got them, if I've got a problem and I'm doing it for a lame horse, then I watch them walk after I've trimmed them, and I'm really specific as to how much spiral they get before I nail the shoe on. So that's how I do it. And then I go to the grinder, and like I showed you in the video, I grind the lateral ground surface on.
Now this one from, thanks for that, Jim. This one from Raquel might almost be a pointer for when you do the presentation next, Jim, because she says, can you provide more details about the slide describing wrong applications for both feet that are inward or outward rotating limbs? The limbs are not labeled medial lateral, so what is each photograph showing? And of course, I don't blame people, they write the questions as they're listening to you, but that's in the past. But if you can just say, what would be the correct application for each foot? I did think I remembered you saying quite clearly that in 98% of the cases, it tends to be an outward rotation, and you are doing a medial lift. And you correct me if I've got it wrong, but that doesn't mean occasionally you get that different. But if you can just go through that again, please, Jim.
Well, that's exactly what you said. And 98% of the time, the horses I'm looking at have either got an outward rotation of the cannon bone in relation to carpus, or the long pastern in relation to the fetlock, and it's outward. And when you watch them land, but every horse that I've observed in the last 20 odd years since I started quantifying this has got a rotation somewhere. And if they've been trimmed to the long axis, they land lateral toe, and there's nothing. The slight lateral toe first is normal and is perceived to be normal. I think that is the norm for a horse, is slight, 2 millimeter lateral toe.
Okay, thank you. Christy just says, thank you, Lorenzo. So that's great. And then we have just a point on the poll. It didn't have a section to offer notes, comments on the presentation, but it said, lovely job, loved the lectures. So you're both getting lots of praise. Yes, would have loved the slides to have numbered slides so that we could reference a slide number in questions. Maybe we might try that in future. That's not quite so easy though. Oh, is it possible to have a translation in French, which shows, because it's written in French, Lorenzo, that my French isn't so bad, that I can just about make it out. But I'm afraid 3 hours of translation, I don't know who wants the job on that, and I'm sorry, Jason, but maybe one day. We would love to do that. We really would love to do it. Now, I think we got through the questions, and I'm really sorry if... there's just one very early from Jürgen Gotthard, which many of you, or maybe both of you would know. Do you have experience with rocker heel ends? So, I mean, in a way, you were rocker in the heel on the medial spiral, weren't you? Oh, sorry, on the lateral spiral. I think that's exactly what you were doing, wasn't it, Jim?
Yeah, well, I actually typed an answer to that question to somebody else, because the guys that know me, the guys that I've trained, and it's a laugh in Scotland, it's a thing called Jimmy level. And every front shoe I put on, I tip the heels 2 millimeter over the edge of the anvil before I'd burn them on. And so every heel of every front shoe I put on gets tipped up. So, since I started doing it, it minimizes that. If you've got a horse that comes in and really strikes heel first, you minimize the concussive of the initial contact by doing this. Same as pencil heel shoes do. And so, yes, I do that regularly.
Okay, well, I hope I haven't missed any. I think we've got to the bottom of the questions. So we've really got to the point. Let me get that out of the way and see if I can share screen. Where what I would like to do is especially thank Jim and Lorenzo. As always, I had, I knew that both of you would do a great job, and you didn't let me down. We had the poll result was fantastic. We only had one person who said they weren't happy, and that was, we had a huge number of answers. And I'm not going to give you the name. I don't want for you to have to go around and see them. I would like everybody to have a good Christmas. We will be back in the new year. We're trying to do these about one every 6 weeks to 2 months, so we don't kill it. When we first started doing the webinars, we thought they would just be there for a year while COVID was on. But we think there's a place, because there's an awful lot of people interested in the horse's hoof and the lower leg of the horse who just don't get the chance to go to live lectures. So thanks to all of you. Just to remember that you will get a recording sent out on Tuesday. Those that wish to join my Facebook group, which is called The Farrier, but please remember you have to answer the questions. That's the deal. We get lots of applications. I bet we only now have about 25 to 33% of applications come through because they won't answer the 3 simple questions. So please join in. We've got a great debating group there on a professional level. That's why we ask the questions, because we monitor it. We want everybody to be able to say what they feel, but in a professional way. And I think I've probably said everything. So come over here, Sophie. I know we haven't got it on big. So Merry Christmas to everybody. Thank you to our speakers especially. And thank you to the audience. We're going to go and get a cup of tea or something a little stronger.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.